So, Professor Martabek has been traveling around the world, from Indonesia to Europe to Greece, Czech, Italy, Australia, Indonesia, China, Singapore, Malaysia, and many other worlds. So, Professor Martabek has 86 videos, and her YouTube channel is Dr. Martabek, right? Catherine. Yes, Catherine. Martabek. So I think this is very important topic today. We will learn from her thought about how ethics and philosophy connect to Pancasila. And without further ado, I would like to invite our Professor Martabek. Time is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very surprised that this could get so organized so quickly. Amazing. And I'm very happy to be here. All right. So I've studied Greek philosophy and Greek culture, and I think of the Greeks as an archetype. They're just a model for a group of people at a certain point in time. Their society became complex enough that their thinking became complex enough so that they understood we are the creature who understands patterns in a world where there are patterns to understand. And then they started looking for patterns all over the place because they wanted to learn about the universe, they wanted to learn about human nature, they wanted to learn about culture, and they wanted to educate each other about what are the lessons from the past, what works and what doesn't work, okay? And so they're trying to teach each other how to live. And so the society kept getting more and more complex, and they developed all these wonderful institutions, and then they became corrupt, and they became unstable, and they ended up voting for a dictator. So they lost their democracy because a politically motivated leader said, if you vote for me, I'll bring back law and order, I'll make my country great again. And they lost their free speech, they lost their freedom. So I live in the US, and I think my country is making a lot of mistakes and following the same pattern. But Indonesia, you can compare that to your own country also. You're in a different phase of development, and you can, it's a good story when you hear about Plato's dialogues to think about, well, is my country getting more corrupt or less corrupt, or which parts of our country are corrupt, and figure out how to preserve your democracy. So the key here is the place of speech. All right, so we should get back to, is this the second slide? Okay, this isn't the first slide. Okay, so the key here in this department is communication. So Plato said that one of the main reasons, probably the most important reason they lost their democracy was the corruption of language and the manipulation of communications. All right, so it's very important what you study. All right, next slide. Okay, so the city of Athens was structured to try and cultivate consciousness of yourself as a citizen. So you're born into a family, you're tribal, you protect your babies, you protect your family. Then you build social networks of people you know. Then you communicate with people in terms of material exchange, you buy stuff, you sell stuff. But then there's this higher level of community, which is creating a middle class. People have enough leisure time and enough money to be generous, to give money to people just because you care about them, to develop trust and goodwill, to develop time to interact with people at a level other than just survival, and also to engage in intellectual exploration, curiosity about the natural world, creation, invention of medicines, ways that we can develop a higher quality of life. Artistic creation, watching the performances of others' artistic creation. This is all the things that make life worth living, is the good life, not just mere material exchange. All right? So that was Aristotle's big contribution, I think. And then Athens was built like that. It was structured like that. I've been there 16 times. Every time I go, I just go, oh, this is so amazing, the way they did this 2,500 years ago. So, they had 12 gods and goddesses, but the main one was Athena. She was the goddess of wisdom and justice and war, but only just war. She had a little brother who loved war. He just liked to go in there and show how brave he was. And he killed people on both sides. He didn't care about who's right and who's wrong. And she's always telling him, stop, stop. This is brutality. This is not just war. The only wars that are just are true. And so that was Athena. Okay, so they also, the main thing you know about their democracy is that if you were a Greek male with some property, your name was put in a hopper, you were chosen randomly, and you had to sit on a jury and decide if someone's guilty or not. And then you also sat in the assembly. So they had a unicameral assembly. If someone wanted the city to do something, they had to go down here on the stage, and they had to argue for it, and then there's take a vote. And that was it. Like, that was the policy. All right, so go ahead. Next slide. Okay, this is the city, and it's taken from one of my favorite hotels, the roof. And right on the ground, there's the natural world, then there's the families where the houses are, and then there's the marketplace where people exchange, and then you start walking up the Acropolis, the hill, and you walk past the theater, you walk up to the temple. There's Athena, the goddess of justice and wisdom. Whatever you're doing in the city, you look up at Athena, and she reminds you, you better act justly, you better seek wisdom. Okay, next slide. Here's you walk slowly up to the temple. So it's a kind of spirituality, living for the sake of something greater than yourself. It's the good life. Every major religion would advocate the pursuit of truth or justice or virtue or beauty. So these are every religious tradition. So in the Greeks, I call it spiritual humanism, because they think we have to seek something spiritual in order to be human. Okay? All right. So next slide. Right next to it is Goddess Athena giving you the power to act justly, to think like a citizen, and expecting you to do it. Now go do it. So here's a court where human beings are listening to court cases. They have to be inspired by this capacity given to them by Athena to make a good decision and to treat somebody they don't know justly according to the rule of law. And you have laws that actually help promote human well-being. Everything is always to enable everyone to flourish to the highest level possible. Okay, next slide. Then the city was more advanced because it wasn't a monarchy where only the monarch made the decisions. It wasn't an aristocracy, a class of people who inherited political power. Instead, it was elected officials, but it was the rule of law. So the Constitution was the ruler of the city. And all right, the other thing is, if you are smart and if you are moral, if you have a good character, what you aspire to is to be a good statecraft, to be a good political leader. That was the most respected because it required the most virtues, the most integrity. Because you could make laws that wove together the rich and the poor, prevented the rich from getting richer and the poor from getting poor, create a middle class, and then inspire people to do what your judgment has decided is best. You could persuade people and inspire people to do things that will actually promote their well-being. Okay. Next slide. Okay, there are natural, universal models of good and bad ways to live. So there are the stories of the goddess and goddesses. There's 12 of them. Each of them has a sacred passion for truth, for justice, for environmental preservation, for respect for the natural world, for wanting to leave behind a society that's better or at least not worse for your children, worrying about your legacy, for finding out the patterns, figuring out what is the universe telling me, or what are the patterns here. Those are what the gods represented. And then every college student, there's a story of Paris. Every college student has to decide, what is my ultimate goal in life? What goal am I going to organize my life around? You can organize your life around maximizing your pleasure, but if you do, you better get wealthy. So you're going to be either seeking wealth as your goal. If that's your goal, you're going to be working with all other people like you. So you're going to be competing for who's the richest the rest of your life, okay? The other goal is power, because we have to have nation states, we have to have security. So power. And if you want power, you want glory, right? Because you can't have power unless people honor you, okay? The trouble is you're always going to be competing with other people who love power. So good luck, right? You just have to put up with that. Or do you want to pursue the love of wisdom and justice? And that means, and truth, that means that you seek truth in any sort of profession that you pursue, and then you use your authority for the well-being of the people over whom you have authority. That's justice. So if you are good at science, you become a doctor, professional, but then you use your professional skill for the sake of the rules. Your goal is health, getting your patients healthy. That's justice. You can be a doctor and be unjust, right? You're using your skills to make more money, right? So to pursue truth and to pursue justice and wisdom is every time you have a patient, you have to make a decision on what would be exactly the right medicine or therapy or whatever. So that's wisdom, is that you can actually make good judgments day in and day out. But that's a way of life. So every young person, all of you, has to make that choice. What are you living for that you're going to organize your life around? So the stories of the gods and goddesses, they don't preach at you. They don't say, now naughty, naughty, don't pursue wealth, because it never works. You know, if you try to use force or threats, you know how little kids are. If you yell at them, pretty soon they'll figure out how to go around you, because they don't really want to do it. In the Greek education, they want you to want to love wisdom. And so they will tell you stories about what happens when people don't. And so all of the Greek tragedies are about, well, have any of you ever had a revenge fantasy? Like somebody hurts you and you fantasize about getting back at them. Anybody?
Honestly, maybe.
Not as funny anymore, but someday you'll get older and you'll start having revenge fantasies, okay? Guaranteed. And so instead of actually taking revenge, nobody broke up with you and you were mad at them. Okay, well, I guess you're more virtuous than I am. So, anyway, so they magnify that, trying to get you to flush that out. I don't really want that. it's not worth it. It just hurts everybody. So another example is King Midas. He was greedy. He just wanted money, right? And so the gods gave him, he asked the gods for a gift. Everything he touched turned to gold. And then he, wow, this is great. Well, then his daughter came and sat on his lap. Right? His daughter turned to gold. And so that's, you're supposed to keep that story in mind. Do I really want to be greedy? And as a matter of fact, when people are greedy or power hungry, they never have enough time at home with their kids. And it does ruin their relationship to their kids. Like, this is a real story, right? So that's how the educational system worked. It's called purgation. You purge yourself. You flush the evil emotions out of your system so you have more energy to be creative and do positive things. Okay, go ahead. Next one. All right, so here's where the theater was. So if you remember the picture of Athens, you're heading up toward the temple, but on the side of the hill is the theater. So you go to the theater and you get this emotions flushed out of you. So you need to be healthy in order to keep pursuing those wonderful sacred passions. If you want to live a flourishing life, you have to have a healthy body. That's where the Olympics come from. So the next one is about the Olympics. So the Olympics were about an overall view of culture. You had the Olympics, instead of going to military school, you had these athletic contests so that you had strong, physically strong young people. But the idea, they also had, at the Olympics, they had competitions in music and in reading Homer, which was like reading the Quran, right? So it was combining physical fitness with cultural awareness and virtue. Also, they were educating people in how to think like a citizen. So long before Athens, the city-states came together. They wrote a body of laws related to the Olympics. They enforced the law just like a democracy. And so it was like an international system of laws. And then they apply them. So just because somebody comes from your city-state, you can't say, they won the race. The person who won the race might have not been from your tribe. You have to get beyond your family, right? And beyond you have to think objectively. So it was practice for democracy, or it was a kind of democracy. All right, next slide. Oh yeah, they also had a very complex kind of medical, because they were very into science. They were into everything. And they had a women's health center in the first island off of the on the coast. Okay, next slide. This was the city center, and this is the most amazing thing. So you had Greek males. Some of them lived in the rural areas, but their names would get picked to be in the jury or the assembly. So this is where people came on Saturday, on the weekend, to buy their food, to buy their furniture and their dishes and whatever, right? So they would come to get that stuff, and then this was also where the apartments were, where the people in rural areas came to stay while they're acting as jurors. And then they would post, this is the most amazing thing, they would post the jury trials that were being held at that time. So it's just like journalism. I have a daughter who's a journalist, incidentally. And I have a son who's an educator, and I have a daughter who's into rainforest, environmental preservation, and also slave labor. So when you were talking about the different departments, I thought, well, yeah, my kids are into all of that. So anyway, so they would come to buy their stuff, And then they would go over and find out what jury trials are being held. Then there was a place for the council, which arranged what is going to get voted on in the assembly today or right this time. And so then they found out what's getting voted on in the assembly. Then there was an open space. You are supposed to come here, stay here, talk about what's going on. You're supposed to be an engaged citizen, an informed citizen. Trial compare to the early, necessarily, this is terrible. You have a choice. You can hide away in your silo. You have a choice. You can hide away in your silo and just say, oh, I'm better than all these people, or they're so ignorant. Or you can say, no, I want to give back. We have a common humanity. We want the same basic things. So it's very important that the language is simple but meaningful, right? Profound. You always think about, what can I tell? Here's a reason why it means a lot to me. I had children. I got married and had children when I was pretty young. And so I'm studying philosophy, but all the time I have to go take care of my kids. And so always I was translating things. How would a 3-year-old understand, 4-year-old? And always everything I learned, it had to have something to do with real life. So I can really identify with women who are trying to raise kids without a lot of money, because I didn't have a lot of money. And that's a real bond, right? Because you really want to protect your babies. So there's always things you can connect with people. Everybody just wants a couple kids. They want to be safe. They want to have the basic needs. And then everything else that you do that's elitist and sophisticated, you ought to be able to get back to those basic needs. All right, next slide. So dialogue was the foundation for ancient cultures. Go ahead, next one. And the goal is wisdom. Hygiene, it means she's the goddess of health, mental, spiritual, and physical. All right. Now, even Confucius, and he's a more authoritarian leader, but you can be democratic and be Confucian. If you read his work about a good leader, it doesn't rule out democracy. It just doesn't insist on it. But the important thing in any society is language, because you can use it to manipulate people or to educate people. And people absolutely have to be talked to. And so how you talk to them really makes a difference. Doesn't matter the form of the Constitution. It matters the quality of the communication. That is really what's going on in a society. Okay, next slide. So the modern Western view is very different. So this is a model of ancient cultures, and that's Islam, Confucianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, all those ancient cultures. Now modern cultures are different. And I think most of your education is probably modern. It's facts. Facts are not values. And so this pursuit of a good that's what Aristotle thought was natural, right? All those virtues in the ancient are natural. That was cut off, denied, thrown out deliberately. So now we have a world where we gain knowledge. And the point of knowledge is to get power. That's the whole foundation of the modern world, to exploit nature. And they had no limits, right? And we've come to the limit. But we still function on this paradigm. So we keep exploiting it. We can't figure out how to make money without destroying nature, even though it's clear we're destroying ourselves. This is why philosophy is important. There's a mindset. And if you have the wrong mindset, you are going to commit suicide, and social science is all you do is study behavior, and you study external, positive reinforcement, to try to get people to behave differently. But in the ancient view, you have to persuade people about, well, what is good and what is evil. You have to link with their minds. You have to talk to them about good and evil. But in the modern view, no, you just control their behavior, and then that will govern what they think about. Okay? All right. The idea was that you'd have this condition, social conditioning, and people would all come out good, right? And they hated religion because they saw that religion was manipulating people, keeping them afraid, so they wouldn't try to change this world. They would just pray about the next world. Well, that isn't what those traditions are really about. It was corruption of the wisdom traditions. Okay, go ahead. Moral relativism, all right? This is an assumption in the modern view that everybody's just conditioned. So you all are Muslim because you were raised to be Muslim, and I was not, because it's just because I was raised that way. Well, if you find the natural foundation, then you can be religious pluralist, right? Interfaith dialogue, because there's an underlying common humanity. And it's only an accident of history that I grew up where I grew up, you grew up where you grew up, so we have this certain bunch of categories. But what you are is a human being. And then that is the foundation for everything else. But that's not relativism. Relativism is that's all you can know, is what you were raised to believe. Okay. Let's see. The other thing was minimal intervention of government. Just let people pursue happiness as they understand it, and everybody will be happy because everybody will be motivated. Okay. Let's see. So on the one hand, you were going to condition people to want to be middle class, to want to care about each other. On the other hand, you were going to leave government out of it and just let them decide for themselves. Okay? When people decide for themselves, they haven't been able to decide that they don't want to be rich. All right, but anyway. Okay, the next slide. All right, so today, the modern Western culture is destroying itself. So, colonialism, right? We're just extending colonialism. So we still have this view that it's good, greed is good, that people should be motivated to pursue whatever they want, whatever makes them happy. You want to force people to behave like Westerners, right? You learn social science, you learn behavior modification techniques, you learn cognitive whatever, and structuralism and cognitivism, and so science and technology lead to material products, but they aren't leading to a middle class, right? What's happening is the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and we can't change our mindset. We're still in the same old mindset. In the wisdom traditions, nobody thinks it's okay to destroy God's creation, right? So the wisdom traditions we're supposed to fit into the natural world. And the wisdom traditions have that you have to educate people through storytelling to get them not to want to be greedy, right? You have to do it through stories and arguments. In the modern view, you do it through external conditioning, positive and negative reinforcement. Okay, next slide. The corruption of language. The social media, of course, is a big problem. No one reads. It's another big problem because the problems we have in the world are complicated. The only way you can get any sort of informed idea about them is to read a book that gives you the history and that gives you, a whole context. So, for example, monopolies, the fact that corporations are buying up other corporations and the money's getting more and more centralized. Well, how do I read a 350-page book about that, right? How that happened in my country. And of course, I don't remember all of it, but I respect the fact that it's complicated, right? And then you can find out why it persists, why it's very difficult for anybody in the legal system to stop it. Stop it. Where's the modern view? It's a modern construct. In the ancient cultures, these smartest people were religious, and they were the doctors, and they were the scientists, and they were the mathematicians, right? They never separated any of those things. God wants us to understand all these patterns. That's what the Greeks also thought, but they all fit together. But the modern world has constructed everything to say that religion is just very bad science. So throw it out. And of course, those stereotypes, under COVID, those stereotypes got magnified. All right, next slide. Political leadership, okay? In the ancient view, it was practical wisdom. Those are all the different virtues. Probably don't want to go through all of them, but there's a whole list of virtues you have to have. Self-control, courage, generosity, forgiveness, ambition, rational, wise ambition, honor, friendships, knowing how to make laws that promote a middle class, knowing how to distribute social goods like education and healthcare, knowing how to punish violators, always for the sake of flourishing, always maximizing human flourishing. Okay, next slide. Okay, the modern view of political leadership. You make your decisions either based on empirical data, utilitarianism, right? How are you going to maximize pleasure? But people are free to define it however they want. So how to make people happy. And then rationalism is that you act on principle. You don't think of emotions at all. You just have a principle there. And you impose principle that the Second Amendment means you can buy as many guns as you want. Well, it doesn't even mean that. But it doesn't matter that we're killing people. You know, we have mass shootings every day. It doesn't matter. It's the principle. We're not going to make any laws because it's the principle. So it has nothing to do with people, right? That's terrible. And then on the other hand, you have, well, if everybody just wants to keep polluting the earth, we have to make them happy, and we want people to be happy. So everybody wants to use fossil fuel, high carbon products, well, you know, that are nasty and unscientific. It's like, no, they're not. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so Plato's dialogues was the idea is that people talk to each other, right? It had a good system. So my main point is they had a great idea. The founders had a great system. How did it get ruined? Foreigners from elsewhere came and educated the best and the brightest. Their parents paid a lot of money. They got this college education. The focus of it was how to be persuasive, how to persuade people in a jury or in an assembly. The foreigners didn't, they said, well, I don't teach morals, you know. You teach your own morals. I just teach you persuasion. So if the young person wanted to get rich or powerful, all they had to do was learn persuasion, and they could get away with anything. They could wrap the city around their finger, right? And they thought that wasn't going to be a problem. Of course it was a problem. Nobody thought like a citizen anymore. And so then they lost their democracy. Well, what's happening today is that I still think in the academy, we're still exporting our mindset, and Indonesians are getting exploited, right? Their trees are getting cut down and all this wonderful stuff. But that's development, right? According to who? We just happen to bet, but hey, we're educating you and we're teaching you how to think like us. Isn't that great? So the example I give that is when I found out about this, I couldn't believe it. I taught at a women's school in Bangladesh. It was, happiness. You should be able to buy whatever you like. And so they tell me about skin whitening products. You guys, you know about skin whitening products? Okay. Okay. Well, I found out about that. I was so shocked. Why? Here's why. And this shows you how brainwashed you are. This is proof how brainwashed you are. When you say, I want to, let me tell you why. You have better skin than I have. Like, I want your skin. My skin is horrible skin. It is, truly. Because my relatives evolved in Sweden, right? So I don't have any whatever you have. And I spent too much time in Greece and I got skin cancer, right? It was just a little thing, no big deal, but it's crappy skin. It's this terrible skin. I get skin cancer. I get age spots, obviously. I get wrinkles. It's like, why would you want my skin? I don't want her skin when I'm 70 years old. I'm going to look like her. I don't want to look like her. Buy it. Literally, buy it. Buy it with your brain. Buy it with your pocketbook. Don't do it. Don't buy McDonald's. Don't buy junk food, right? Okay. So your trees are getting cut down for palm oil, right? It's a horrible problem with deforestation. Then we take your palm oil, just like Britain did. I mean, this is colonialism. We take it over to the U.S., we make potato chips or all that crappy junk food, and then we sell it back to you, right? It's the same thing. Like, stop. This is what Britain did to India. Grow tea, make tea bags, sell it back, right? Cotton. So stop. That's a modern mindset. It's a dumb mindset. It's killing everything. But you have to incorporate the ancient mindset, right? You have to adapt it, right? Most of that is sexist. Of course, I don't agree with that. Aristotle thought women were not capable of doing philosophy. It's like, thanks a lot, Aristotle, but no thanks, right? So, of course, you can't take it literally. You have to modify it. But that's what it means to be an intellectual, and an intellectual leader is you take the insights from the past and you apply them to today, always to maximize flourishing. All right, next slide. Okay, so Socrates. So there was this guy named Socrates who went into the marketplace and he asked leaders, okay, you're a military leader. What is courage? You're a political leader. What is justice? You're a poet. What is beauty? And they couldn't answer his questions, right? And he had follow-up, so he made them be transparent. You have to explain what you're doing with your power, and you have to be accountable. You have to tell us why. That's a good thing. Those are very important criteria for a democracy. In a democracy, everyone needs to be transparent. You have to be explained. Why do you get to go to college? What did you do? Did your daddy just pay for it? And you really, Kushner, Ivanka Kushner's husband, you know about the Trumps, whatever, Ivanka Trump. Anyway, he wanted to go to Harvard, of course. A few years before he applied, his big daddy gave them $2 million. He got in, and he was in the third tier in his high school, and people in the first tier didn't get in. And when the people at his school found out that he got in, they cried because they were so upset about how unjust that you can buy yourself. You buy your way into anything. That's the U.S. It's not a democracy. It's the rule of the rich. It's an oligarchy. So it looks like a democracy. It's not, right? And so this is really important. And so you just have to figure out how to combine ancient and modern and come up with something that fits Indonesia. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to the next one because I know I'm talking too much. These are other examples of too. And you can't have a democracy unless you really believe people are capable and it's natural to seek justice, wisdom, and truth. If all people really cared about was money and power, they would fight with each other. Some strong man would say, vote for me and I'll maintain law and order, and you won't have democracy, right? It'll be over. And that's it. And nobody will even care. So we only have it because it's possible. And it's also best. Okay, next slide. Okay, the sacred texts were being abused. So this would be like when you recite the Quran. It's great. The person doing it is sincere. Can you imagine somebody reciting the Quran, getting up, everybody knows he's making $1 million, he's a millionaire, he's a great performer, makes everybody feel good, right? That would be corrupt, right? But that's what happened in Athens, is that people were using these sacred texts to get money, to get fame, you know, to get power. So that's another corruption. Hollywood. So we can have, in Hollywood, there's a lot of superficial movies, right? Date movies or something that everybody wastes their time and they know they're wasting their time, right? You're not thinking about serious things. That's too hard. Let me watch a movie, right? But sometimes they're really good movies. But then I would read the review of this movie about Schmidt, and all it talked about was, wow, Jack Nicklaus, what a great performance. So all I talk about is the actors and the performance and whether this is forwarding their career. It's like, it was a good movie. It was a tragedy. It was about a guy who tried to fit in and made all these mistakes. It was trying to teach you something, but nobody's learning, right? Does everybody understand that? The critics they don't even want to learn, even when it's a good movie. So the whole system is corrupt. Then there are religious leaders that are too strict, right? And you have this in your country, I think. You have arguments between, I'm the real Muslim because I'm tolerant, or no, I'm the real Muslim because I'm. So we're kind of in this together, right? In every tradition, there are the more extremists and then the religious pluralists, okay? All right, next slide. Oh, then there's the intellectuals that just hide in their offices and they don't have anything to do with people. They talk jargon, they're very specialized. The things they think about, nobody else is interested in at all. And that's a big problem in the modern world. There's many college professors like that who think they're detached observers. They comment on how terrible things are, but they don't get involved. Okay, next slide. So here's an issue about how even the discipline of international relations has turned into this jargon where people in the academy, in college, just talk to each other. And international relations is just a bunch of words that have nothing to do with life or the way people actually are trying to relate internationally. That's what Mr. Andy said, is you can major in communications and not be able to communicate. Yeah, that was a big, because you've got this notion of the academy is you just gain knowledge, you just learn stuff, but you don't apply it. It's not a way of life. In the ancient world, it's a way of life. That's the priority. Okay, next slide. So again, I know I'm way over time. So the idea here is that the whole higher educational system is over-specialized. People are isolated. They don't talk to other people. They don't learn to communicate what they're learning and how the average person would actually gain from it. And this is a huge loss because there's so much potential for educated people to educate the public. And you can't have a democracy if all the educated people are ignoring the people who vote. Right? Okay, next slide. All right, so this again is the thing about how you can be good at STEM, but not a good person, right? STEM is used for military. STEM is used to manipulate people to buy stuff they don't need. Okay, next slide. This one is just how the food system is being completely corrupted by knowledge about how to make money on selling people food that their bodies actually crave, and they get addicted to it, and they get obese, they get diabetes, they get heart disease. And a lot of people make a lot of money on making you sick, and then if you're a diabetes doctor, you make 3 times more money than if you're a doctor who says, eat right and get exercise. Okay, get out of here and go do it. So they don't get paid anything. The ones who, do heart disease get paid a lot more. Okay. Okay, greed in the U.S. So this is what I'm warning you. You're going to end up here. Don't go here, right? It's what happened when greed controls the food system. All right, next one. Money corrupts academics. Positive psychology. So the discipline of psychology, it can get, in the US, there's people making tons of money. They come to corporations, they say, be positive, believe that the corporation is your life and it's making you happy. And they really, they're really serious about it. So corporate retreats, merge yourself with the corporate collective, right? Your happiness and the corporation, isn't that great? We're all just happy, right? Oh my gosh, I could make so much money if I just would get on board here. Okay, next slide. The elite universities disdain honest intellectual inquiry because they have this highly specialized vocabulary. And that is even worse in developing countries because they take your best and brightest and manipulate them to be like that. Okay, next slide. There's Socrates. He's exposing the corruption, and he should be called the best citizen in Athens. He's keeping the democracy going. Is that what happened? Next slide. He goes to prison and he gets killed. Like, we don't want to hear about this. Okay. Yeah. He corrupted the youth because they started questioning their authorities. And he didn't believe in the traditional gods, right? So religion is used as a radical kind of resistance to change. And that happens over and over again, right? Okay. Next slide. So Indonesia's contribution. So you have university community engagement requirement. I think that is great, right? I wish we could get that in America. So this is where, the punchline for you. In America, we have this horrible situation of specialization, jargon. You still have hope. You have this wonderful tradition. Every single professor has to be engaged. This is great. It would be called, in my country, it would be called Stalin, socialism. Keep the government out of my life. All right. But I think it's great. Okay, next slide. So I also think you can use Panchasila. It's part of your culture. Now, I know there's a history of Panchasila being interpreted by politicians, right? It's being corrupted to justify doing stuff, and it's lousy. It's bad stuff that they do. Same with religion, right? Corrupt politicians can hide. They can hide behind religion. They can hide behind Panchasila. But if you just look at Panchasila and just look at what a reasonable way to interpret it would be, you have, and all of these religious leaders had these same virtues, right? So it fits, right? It works. And then humanitarianism. So then the Greek view of humanity, right? Depends upon your view of humanity, obviously. But there's an ancient view and a modern view. And I think that this is the ancient view. And then you have unity and diversity. So the Greek gods, yeah, people are different, but you unify them together in your own life and in your society. Okay, next slide. The gaining wisdom through deliberation. When I read this, okay, you have to remember, I'm trained in Greek. And then I read, but I was like, wow, this is so Greek. This is so much Aristotle. So you learn through talking to other people, not through some principle. Rights, I have a right, blah, blah, right? It's conversation. And then the social contract is that the society provides you with education, healthcare, but then you give back. And that was very much the Greeks, too. If you don't give back, you're going to die, right? Your democracy will not last. All right. Let's see, next slide. All right, so this is the end, finally. So people still go to Athens, and they still talk about, what are the similarities and differences? What are the analogies? And then the main thing for you, how can you keep your democracy, right? How can you avoid falling into polarization? The rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, people becoming unstable, the intellectuals hiding away, all this stuff. How can you avoid it? And which parts of your society, where are the real weaknesses? And my society is different. And what's polarization? It's based on the inability to communicate, right? The two sides won't talk to each other.
The first through the tunnels of time, from the 80s, Athena, and then colonialism era, and then democracy era, and up to today's phenomenon. It's great. I think this, if we learn from you, it will take maybe 8 semesters, yeah? A lot of books to read, as you mentioned, Pak Gun. That's very interesting. I'm interested to know about Agora. Yeah. Not only in goods and services, but also in politics, in religions, And I was wondering why there's a sort of disconnection between the concept of Agora as a marketplace where intellectual intercourse occurred at the time and the definition of market today. And secondly, I'm also interested when your talk, I think, very much inspired by many Greek philosophers. Dialogue, good communication. And based on colonialism, I think we have been brainwashed, as you mentioned. And due to the fact that now we have been facing with the modernization in every aspect, when I have to stimulate them to talk, it seems to me it's hard for them to talk. Even though campus as a free of speech place where individual can enjoy the freedom of speech, do you think there's a relation between today's innovation and the change of behaviors among the people? Thank you very much.
Actually, there's all sorts of research that in our, but we're not changing them, we're destroying them. Okay, I mean, there's research that we have the brain stem. That's where these primitive drives, right, enter into our brain, and they're fear and pleasure, right? So fantasies and phobias, especially sex, of course, they're very powerful drives. And then fear is a very powerful drive. But there's a whole white matter that's connected to that, that's deep in the brain. And then there's the more recently evolved part of the brain. That's your contact with the outside world, cognition, right? So there's your senses. Well, the white matter is not developing, or it's disintegrating. And the cognitive part is overstimulated and it's falling apart. Well, the white stuff is philosophy, it's reflection. So that's where you get all this sensory input and then you reflect on it. Or it gets developed, but then it starts deteriorating because you're not using it. So it really is a problem. And all the children, do you want to do that? Because you make good consumers. If people don't think, then they are very malleable to advertising, to war, to all this stuff because they can't reflect. So I think it's again, the movie Frankenstein or the play is very popular right now because it's all about technology run amok. Well, okay, how many times do we have to see the play before we actually do something? That's the model of economics. Okay, here's the other thing. This is one of the main reasons I got into philosophy, was there's a model of what it means to be rational. So you have to find out in history, if you say Hitler was this bad guy and he killed these people, blah, blah, what you have to realize, he didn't think he was a bad guy. He thought he was good, okay? And you have to read his speeches, and you know that he had reasons for what he did. He was persuasive. That's the ancient view, is you have to, people have ideas, and you have to argue against them. So the idea in the West about economics and about rationality is that a rational person, profit maximizer. So you calculate everything according to your own economic well-being. So in theory, you will sell all the best products at the lowest price because people will figure out what the best product is at the lowest price because they'll be self-interested, right? Well, on that model, nobody would ever get married because you lose money. Money. You would never, ever have children. Ever. Because, my God, they're so expensive. If on this model, now this is, you have to make sure you get, there's the model, and then there's what you think the model's about, right? If you're born poor in Thailand, and you're a guy, you will get married. Every time your wife gets pregnant, you'll have it checked to see if it's a boy or girl. You get rid of a boy, you have a girl, you sell her into sex slavery, and you tell her to send the money home. And you're rational. That's the model. That's really what we want to put at the very head of every culture. But that's what we've done, right? We've decided that we can't make judgments about values. So the ultimate value is to keep increasing the gross domestic product, right? Keep making the market bigger. Because that's a value-free approach? No, it's got all these values. And it's a terrible value. It's very inhumane. But on that model, if you don't act like a rational calculator, you're irrational. So it's irrational to get married. It's irrational to have kids. It's especially irrational to actually spend money on your kid, right? It's just, it is absolutely crazy. It really is. But nobody really thinks deeply about what is this model. And nobody questions that a ruler is successful if the economy grew. Well, but what about if is the money being distributed? So in the US, yeah, our economy, but our income inequality is horrible. And then, so you have to tax. So everything people absolutely need. So the model of rational calculation works if you don't really need the product or if you don't need it right away. Because then you can either not buy it or you can buy it later on. Then it works. What about education? What about healthcare? You have to have it. And so those things should be government funded. Because when they're driven by greed and people have to have the product, you will get sold the worst product at the highest price because somebody can really exploit you because you have to buy it. This is common sense, but it's the model we're going on is money is the goal.
Thank you very much once again, Professor Martha Beck. I know the time is over. Now it's 11, so I know lecturers and students have other schedule at this time. So once again, thank you very much, Professor Martha Beck. Let's give applause for Professor Martha Beck. As I mentioned before, Professor Martha Beck is going back to UIN Jakarta in the middle of June and July. So we will meet again, inshallah, this year. Once again, thank you very much, Professor Martha Beck. And Professor Andi, would you like to conclude something?
Okay, very briefly, I would like to thank once again to Professor Martha. This is very grateful to us. Very important thing about philosophy, yeah. Particularly if you have become a doctor. Doctor is the abbreviation of philosophy, doctor. So once you are a doctor, you should be also philosophy. I have noticed that many works now, their thesis or dissertation, there's a little bit lack of philosophy aspects. So I think this is very important to underline, yeah, that we have to talk about that. Because so far we always talk about scientific things based on interview, observation, documentation, and literature, but very lacking in terms of abstract things like philosophy. And then the last point that is very important also, of the last point that she pointed, yeah, before just ending the talk, is that she appreciated Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he actually very much into democracy, because we have the principle of musyawarah. Musyawarah is deliberation, and also transparency. We call siddiq. This is so-called fatona, which is agility, and there is also accountability. This is the main principle of Muhammad way of communication. Yeah. Okay, thank you once again. CDES, CDES will always do a lot of discussion like this. We'll bring a lot of speakers from US, from all over the world, and be ready, yeah. And then thank for Dekan, ya, printer Anda. Itu Tuhan bersumpah dengan tinta dan pena. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Professor Andi. And this is a very critical seminar and studium general. This is very important today. And one last conclusion I would like to quote from one philosopher: "A journey of 1,000 miles begin with single step." So you have, this is the begin of your study, and then the next step you have to continue your master and PhD to be a philosopher. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much to Professor Martha Beck.